Welcome everybody to the first of three lectures delivered by Hava Tirosh-Samuelson on modern Jewish philosophers. On February 26th, please join us for the second lecture, which will focus on the thought of Zalman Schachter Shalomi. And on March 5th, I believe, for the discussion of Jonathan Sachs. I'm Stanley Mervis. I'm the Director of Jewish Studies and the Grossman Chair of Jewish Studies at ASU. Jewish Studies at ASU serves as a resource for exploring the Jewish experience in all its dimensions, including history, language, religion, and thought. Our degree program, certificate, and courses bring that scholarship into the classroom. Our public programs, such as this one, brings the same scholarship into a wider community and to audiences all around the world. These programs are free and open to everyone, regardless of background or identity, and are made available online shortly after each event. And let me now introduce my esteemed colleague, Professor Hava Tirosh-Samuelson, is a Regents Professor of History and the Irving and Miriam Lowe Professor of Modern Judaism at Arizona State University. She served as the Director of Jewish Studies at Arizona State for nearly 17 years. Before joining the faculty of ASU in 1999, Tirosh-Samuelson taught at Hebrew Union College in New York, Columbia University, Emory University, and Indiana University. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Outstanding Young Faculty Award at Indiana University in 1994, the Distinguished Alumni Award of Stony Brook University, and the Gary Cronbull Difference Maker Award of Arizona State University. Cronbull.
Buell.
Is it Bull?
Yeah, Buell.
Okay, yeah. A Jewish intellectual, thank you. A Jewish intellectual historian, Tirosh-Samuelson writes on Jewish philosophy and mysticism, religion, science and technology, Judaism and ecology, and feminism and gender. In addition to over 70 essays and book chapters, she is the author of the award-winning Between Worlds, The Life and Thought of Rabbi David ben Judah Messer Leon, Happiness in Premodern Judaism, Virtue, Knowledge, and Well-Being, and Religion, Environment, The Case of Judaism. She is also the editor of 8 volumes and serves as editor-in-chief of the Library of Contemporary Jewish Philosophers, a series of 21 books featuring outstanding contemporary Jewish thinkers. Tirosh-Samuelson is the recipient of over 3.5 million in external grants, which funded conferences, workshops, public lectures, and publications on religion, science, and technology, and on various aspects of the Jewish historical experience. A nationally and internationally renowned scholar, she has served on the boards of the Association of Jewish Studies and Zygon, the Journal of Religion and Science, and is a fellow of the International Society of Science and Religion. In 2008, she was among the founding members of the International Jewish Science and Medicine Group and has organized and managed an annual conference for the past 16 years. So please join me in welcoming Professor Tirosh-Samuelson.
Okay. So it's wonderful to have you all come in, come sit down. You can bring her up. Sure. She can learn about learning. So, you all know now who I am, and let me start by reminding everybody that last year we started this conversation about contemporary Jewish thinkers, and we had 3 presentations, one on Martin Buber, one on Joseph Soloveitchik, and one on Mordechai Kaplan. So you already heard about me, but I do different kind of things. But here are the books that I would like to bring to your attention. So Stanley mentioned the first book, the award-winning book from the Hebrew University in Israel. The second book is actually, I just spoke about that book in the conference of Judaism, Science, and Medicine that we had this Monday morning, or Sunday and Monday. The third book there is actually came out of a conference that I did here at ASU in 2001, and that's still the only book that you can get that discusses women and gender in Jewish philosophy. There's no other book like that. on the market. So that came out of a conference that I did here. And then you have the book that, the green book is about Hans Jonas, a very important German Jewish thinker. And we had a conference, I put a conference about him in 2005, and this book came in 2008. And on the right side of the slide, you see a reference to the entire library of contemporary Jewish philosophers. It's a set of 21 volumes. It shows or features 20 thinkers. Each book has an introduction about the thinker. Some of them I wrote, but a lot of them were written by other people. 4 essays by the thinker, and then an interview with me and with a person, sometimes with a person that I co-edited the project, and that's Aaron Hughes, Professor Aaron Hughes, who is now at Rochester University. So anyway, this is an attempt on my part to show that there is a lot of creativity going on among Jews today, and it's not just today, currently. I'm talking in the last really 70 years or so of creative theoretical work. And it really pains me, I should say, that a lot of Jews are not familiar with this material. So yes, when we talk about it at the university, maybe some students will know something about it. But I think that we have so much wisdom with us here among people. Some of them are alive, some of them are no longer with us. And that's the purpose of doing what I'm doing, just to bring it to your attention and encourage you to get to know more. So let me begin by, since we have a series, 3 lectures, I want to frame first kind of what are the questions that I'm going to look at? And I put those questions here for you, and I will not go question by question to kind of make sense of what are the questions that are of interest to me. And I don't know, given the fact that we are on Zoom as well, I don't know if it's a good idea to stop and have a discussion. Normally in a regular class when I teach at the university, you can always stop and have a conversation and really have a give and take, but we are a little bit constrained because we have people on Zoom. So it's not going to be the same thing as a regular class, which is, in my view, much more a live format. So basically, you have the questions. We'll start with, why should Jewish philosophers matter to us today? It's not obvious. Most Jews don't really know about Jewish philosophy, don't care, I would have to add. So why is that the case? I will have to make the case of Jewish philosophy to you. Who is the Jewish philosopher? Very complicated question, actually, you'll see in a minute. What is the context? What is the social context the Jewish thinkers find themselves? That's a question that we need to think about. Not obvious either. The next question that we'll say something about is what's the difference between philosophy and theology? And you'll see indeed that it's very murky. The lines are very murky. Maybe none of those terms really work here. Maybe it's better to talk about religious philosophy, because all of those people will have to say a lot, all of them said a lot about religion and religious issues. So that would be a question. And then why I chose the 3 people, and then basically what's my goal. So that's going to be our introduction. Let's delve into it. Why does Jewish philosophy matter? So I would say that there's just no way to know what Judaism is about, no way to understand Jewish culture, no way to understand Jewish history without paying attention to philosophy. Now, I know that most people can say, well, but in my synagogue, that's not the case. I never heard any philosopher mentioned in my synagogue. That's very possible. But nonetheless, for me, as an intellectual historian, that's impossible. So I believe that the Jewish philosophical thought is very much part of Jewish intellectual history, and my goal is to bring it to your attention. To go beyond it, it is through philosophy the Jews were able to explain to themselves what it means to be Jewish, because it's not obvious what is Jewish, what is Jewishness, what is Judaism, what does it mean to believe in anything that the Jewish tradition speaks about. You need philosophers to think it through with you, and that's what Jewish philosophers do. But a lot of it is also to bring that knowledge to non-Jews. So if you know medieval history, you would know the Jewish thinkers had to defend Judaism against the claims of Christian theologians, for example. So in the Middle Ages, we had public debates, usually sponsored by the state, by the royal power, in which Jews had to explain what they believe in and why they believe whatever they believe. So the point is that Jewish philosophy is the language, is the idiom, is the medium, if you wish, of making sense of what Judaism is. And to do that, the way I understand Jewish philosophy is always to show how much Jews interacted with the cultures around them. So it's not the case that the Jewish thinkers come up with ideas totally from their head. Absolutely not. It's always the conversation between Jews and other philosophical thinkers around them. It doesn't have to be just philosophy, it can be theology, it could be just the culture at large. So hello, good seeing you. Come in. So it's great to see how Jewish thinkers always read what non-Jewish thinkers wrote. Sometimes the non-Jewish thinker could have lived hundreds of years before them. So Maimonides, for example, read Aristotle. Now, not only did Maimonides read Aristotle, who lived more than 1,000 years before, or close to it, but he read all the Muslim interpreters of Aristotle. So the point is that through philosophy, through the conversation between Jewish thinkers and non-Jewish thinkers, Judaism evolved. Therefore, I think that Jewish philosophy is very much part of Judaism, but unfortunately, few people teach it like that. So the Jewish philosophers would explain what does it mean to believe in revelation? What does it mean to be that the world was created? What does it mean to every aspect of the Jewish tradition, whether it's about law, whether it's about Torah, whether it's about ethics, whether it's about how do we know the world, namely epistemology, how does our mind work? Those are all philosophical questions, and the Jews will work through those issues in conversation with other thinkers. So far, so good. You see where I'm going? So it's basically, I'm telling you, it's important to know Jewish philosophy. It's not just something, oh, well, this is just for 3 people who care about those things. No, to be Jewish, I would argue, you really have to deal with the philosophical issues, and you'll see how it goes on in this conversation. So next is, who is a Jewish philosopher? Who is this kind of person, and where can we find it? That would be the follow-up question. So if you all right, I need to see my slide a little bit better. So a first question, a slide on the left, for example, will tell you, well, is any Jew who studies philosophy in a department of philosophy in America or in Europe or anywhere, would that person be considered a Jewish philosopher? And here I would say probably not. Not every if you sit in a class of philosophy and you happen to be Jewish, it doesn't mean that you're going to engage in Jewish philosophy. Actually, I would say that in most classes, including in our esteemed university, in most classes of philosophy here at ASU, there will be no discussion of the ideas related to Jewish philosophy. So you can be Jewish and you can take those courses, but you're not going to be engaging in Jewish philosophy. So most likely the Jewish philosopher, let's take another possibility. Would the Jewish philosopher be an observant Jew who is interested in philosophy in order to explain what he or she kind of think about and what kind of learning is available to them? So I would say that a Jewish philosopher, most likely, you will find that observant Jews will be interested in philosophy. Now we will have to figure out in what context. So a Jewish thinker can teach philosophy either in a Jewish institution. Okay, so the Jewish institution would be a place where you're going to make sense of what does it mean to be a Jewish philosopher. So that's the second one, the rubric second one from the left would be basically in a Jewish institution, I can teach Jewish philosophy, and most of those institutions will be religiously dominated. So you will be a Jewish thinker operating in a Jewish institution and speaking about Maimonides or about Hermann Cohen or about Levinas or anybody else like that. So that's probably, we're getting closer to who is the Jewish philosopher. Now, what about secular Jews? Most Jews today are actually non-religious, they're non-observant. So what are we doing with them? So here we get kind of, it's also complicated. A secular Jew who can be philosophically trained, but if that Jew doesn't live at all as a Jew, doesn't engage in Jewish life, would that person's teaching or writing or publishing, would that have anything to do with Jewish philosophy? So that also gets kind of that's difficult. So just being a born Jew and studying philosophy doesn't necessarily make you automatically into a Jewish philosopher. Okay? In other words, when I'm pushing it, that to be a Jewish philosopher, you have to engage in certain texts, in certain questions, in certain problems. And usually, the more secular you are, probably the less involved you're going to be in Jewish philosophical questions. Now let's take the rubric to the right. What about rabbis? Are rabbis who write about Jewish philosophy, would they be considered Jewish philosophers? And here the answer is yes. You do have rabbis. I think, for example, in my own series that I published, Rabbi Eugene Borowitz. Eugene Borowitz, a Reform rabbi, was a philosopher, taught philosophy in Hebrew in college. So here's an example of a person who is clearly a Jew, committed to Judaism, knowledgeable about philosophy, and teaches it in a Jewish institution. So most Jewish philosophers are these kind of people, okay? They are very engaged in Jewish life. If you're just a secular Jew and you study philosophy, most likely you're not going to be engaged in the issues related to Jewish philosophers, to Jewish philosophy. So you get the complexity of who is the Jewish philosopher. Let's look at the lower line when you have in the middle a reference to intellectual history. So I'm actually an intellectual historian. I think about how ideas are developing over time, how they relate to the culture at large, how do they operate in text, how do they express in, how are they manifested in text. All that makes me a Jewish intellectual historian, but am I a Jewish philosopher? That gets harder. I probably will say, no, I'm not really a Jewish philosopher because I don't write constructive philosophy. I don't tell Jews what they need to believe in. I describe what Jewish culture has generated over the years, but I don't really say like Eugene Borowitz, who has had many books, he's deceased now. But Eugene Borowitz and the people we are going to speak about, they told Jews what they have to think, how they have to think, what they need to believe, how they need to position their ideas. Okay, so you can see that the complexity of that who is a Jewish philosopher is not a simple question, and obviously different people will take different views. So let's look at the question of what's the setting, and the setting is also problematic. In the university, I would say the least productive setting for Jewish philosophy would be the secular university. Very little activity, really creative activity, happen in the secular university. It doesn't mean that they don't exist in secular university. They do, but that's not the setting. So a more productive setting for Jewish philosophy would be either universities in Israel. So Bar Ilan University, Haifa University, Ben Gurion University, Hebrew University, those are good settings for creative Jewish philosophy. That's where the action is. much in America. Where do you find those places where Jewish philosophical thinking happened? It's in seminary, in religious seminary, so Hebrew Union College, Jewish Theological Seminary, Reconstructionist Seminary, those places, Rabbinical Seminary. That's a place to talk about philosophy. And then you have all sorts of kind of semi-academic institutions like Pardes, like Drisha, like kind of not universities, not seminaries, something in between. Especially today, that's kind of common. So yes, Jewish philosophies. I'll put it this way: fewer people engage philosophy than other topics. It's not like the Holocaust. It's not like the Bible. It's not like even Jewish ethics. So philosophy is limited in terms of the scope of people engaged in it, and it's technical. You have to know quite a lot of kind of the vocabulary and the problems and how you frame the issues in order to engage in philosophical activities. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is not, I would agree, this is not for everybody. Philosophy is really for limited group of people in terms of the audience, and we'll get to that when we get to talk about the audience, let's say, of Fackenheim. So next is a big question, is the relationship between Jewish philosophy and Jewish theology. And I admit that this is really a murky thing. When does a philosopher stop being a philosopher and turns into a theologian, and and the opposite, right? When he's a theologian, really becomes a philosopher. So philosophy is more about a way of thinking. It's a technical, it's more, think about it more like knowing the grammar, like when you know language. If you know the grammar, that's different than just knowing how to speak the language. So knowing the theory of the language is more or less what's happening here with the philosopher. So the philosopher, it's kind of a second level, second order analysis. You need to know, there's a certain kind of problems that you need to be familiar with. For example, the relationship between mind and body, or questions about truth, or question about justice. These are all technical questions that you need to have the facility to work with. The theologian is unlike the philosopher. The theologian usually begins with the biblical text or the rabbinic text or the set of beliefs that Jews already take for granted. For example, that God exists. So the philosopher cannot start with God exists, but the theologian does. So the theologian, the existence of God is very much something that that person will take, I would say, for granted, will think it through, but still, very few theologians, perhaps one theologian I can think about, Jewish theologian, who had a problem with the existence of God is Richard Rubinstein, who is a post-Holocaust theologian. You'll see a picture of him later on. And he argued, indeed, that after the Holocaust, we cannot talk about the existence of God. God is dead. And that's the meaning of Auschwitz. The meaning of Auschwitz is the death of God, at least the traditional conception of God. So we are not talking about Richard Rubinstein, but this is an example how the theologian always think within a certain set of religious belief system, and that's what distinguishes the theologian from the philosopher. But most theologians are philosophically trained, and most theologians have the capacity of examining their beliefs and really making sense of their beliefs through the knowledge of philosophy. Okay, so that issue is going to be with us. You'll see, for example, in the case of Fackenheim, Fackenheim was trained in both. He was as you'll see in a minute, he was trained as a rabbi and he was trained as a philosopher. And his issue, and that's why I chose to lead with him, is kind of how do I bring my philosophical knowledge to make sense of my religious beliefs? Not so much religious actions, but religious beliefs. So it is a problem, and maybe one way of solving kind of the tension between theology and philosophy is to talk about religious philosophy. That the people that we're going to talk about are religious philosophers, and you can say that some are more philosophically trained or better philosophically trained or more adept as philosophers than others. So Fackenheim, of the three people in this series, Fackenheim is the best philosopher. He was the best trained philosopher. And he knew the philosophical tradition of the West better than the other two because he was trained in that way. Come close to him is Rabbi Sachs. So Rabbi Sachs also was trained in philosophy, in moral philosophy. Rabbi Sachs, different kind of training, but close enough. The least philosophically trained is the second person I will talk about in this series, and that's Zalman Schachter Shalomi. And then we'll have to ask the question, well, why did you include him if he's not as philosophically developed as the other two? So we'll get to that as we go along. So why did I choose these three thinkers? I could have chosen other three, and maybe if there is interest in this conversation, and you'll see that each year we can take three people and examine them and look carefully or deeply into their teaching. Come in. And if you ask me why these three, I chose these three because in a sense, they give us a spectrum of contemporary Judaism. You cannot be a Jew today without thinking about the meaning of the Holocaust. Unfortunately, that has become even more true given the developments of the last 2 years, especially after October 7. But I would say even without October 7, I don't think that Jews can be either oblivious to or uninformed about or uninterested about in the Holocaust as to use the language of Fackenheim, as an epoch-making event. So the Holocaust is crucial to our understanding of who we are as Jews in the 21st century. So that was a good reason to start with Fackenheim, but also Fackenheim is associated with Reform Judaism, so I wanted to give you a sense of what Reform Jewish thought is about. The second person, Schachter Shalomi, I chose him. He is the founder of a new way of being Jewish in the 20th century, and that's Jewish renewal. Anybody here from Jewish renewal? No, nobody here is associated with Jewish renewal, but Jewish renewal is a very important kind of, you can call it New Age type of New Age Judaism, and that's the focus will be for next session. So again, I don't think you can understand contemporary Judaism without thinking about the Jewish renewal movement. And then the third person, Jonathan Sachs, who is not an American. I'm sure you know that he unfortunately passed away in 2020. He was the chief rabbi of the Orthodox communities or the Hebrew congregations in the Commonwealth, but he only represented technically the Orthodox communities in England. But he was such an influential thinker, not just in England, also in America. And he was crucial for really emerging as the voice of modern Orthodoxy. And modern Orthodoxy, not just for modern Orthodox, but all over the world. So that's the reasons kind of dealing with these three. Each one is associated with a different aspect of contemporary Judaism. Each one focused on different things. Fackenheim focused on the Holocaust and the meaning of the Holocaust. Schachter Shalomi will focus primarily on ecological issues, the crisis of our world today, the ecological crisis and how to respond to it. And Rabbi Sachs is going to focus primarily on our moral breakdown, the moral challenges. How can we make sense of a society that is basically frayed, society that is falling apart, society in which people don't care about each other, society in which people only care about themselves. So his major message is going to be stop thinking about the I and think more about the we. But to explain all that, we'll get to that in the third session. So that's the rationale for these three. I could have chosen other three. And if this series will continue in years, in the following years, we'll go to other people. What's my goals? my goals is really, I would love to have people more engaged in knowing about Jewish philosophers. That may be a high mark. That may be too much to expect. But I really want you to suggest within your own community, within whatever community you belong to, that the rabbis or the leaders or whoever it is that you're connected with will bring to the interest of the community philosophical question, philosophical text, philosophical people who are philosophers and can speak to the community. Somehow this language or this kind of conversation has become very marginal in Jewish life. And I think that's unfortunate. Okay, so far so good. That's the kind of how to contextualize what we're going to do in 3 sessions. So now I would like to, I just taught a course, not just because it was really in 2024. I taught a course for the first time, this course on modern Jewish philosophy at ASU. And I'll hear examples. And when you get the, if you don't, obviously you can take down all the names of those books, but people always say to me, why are you mentioning books? I mention books because I really want people to read some of them. Obviously, you're not going to read all of them, but at least 1 or 2 to show what's available out there. So I had to choose. A major problem for a teacher at ASU especially is which book am I going to choose to bring to my students? I ended up choosing the book from the left, the second left. I'm not sure it was the best book for the class. I do a lot more. I bring a lot more material, but I just want to bring to your attention the fact that there's a challenge. How do you choose what students need to know? How do you present it? How do you make sense of it for them? Each book here presents a story from a different perspective, chooses to focus on this rather than on that. Each writer has his own way of telling the story of Jewish philosophy. So obviously, the students had a lot of readings to do, and it was very rewarding. It was a very successful course in which students really realized, wow, there's so much depth here. Let's get into it. The books at the bottom, I give you 3 examples of how Jewish philosophy today is done by very big publishing houses that really take Jewish philosophy as a field. So whether it's Rutledge, whether it's Cambridge, whether it's Oxford, you can get a lot of work published in this field. But who is reading it? I don't know. It's not Jews in the congregations, I can give you that. It's scholars somewhere in the world, Jewish and non-Jewish. Okay, so now let's begin. That's kind of the background. Now I hope I convinced you that Jewish philosophy matters. Now let's start with a focus on our person. That's Mr. Fackenheim, Emil Ludwig Fackenheim. How many people are familiar with his name? So you had 2. You heard his name. You're Canadian, so that makes sense. In Canada, he was a big name. He taught at the University of Toronto for many years. But the reason I like to show the several pictures of him from his earlier years, when he was in Germany, you can see the difference between how he looked and how he presented himself to the world. The person on the left, right? The person on the left is clearly looking a very assimilated type Jew, a very upper middle class type Jew. Probably a picture from Halle. I don't know exactly. Halle is where he was from, and or maybe from Berlin. I'm not sure, but if you look at that and you compare it to how he looks toward the end of his life, in the end of his life, he looks much more like a traditional Jew, right? So the 2 pictures on the right side, much later in life, in a sense, what you see him, and I believe it had something to do with the fact that he focused on the Holocaust as his major emphasis. So he's a theologian. Here in the beginning, he does not wear a kippah. At the end, he does wear a kippah, right? And you can see that he becomes much more kind of traditional Jewish also. In the later years, 1983, he made Aliyah and settled in Israel. Whereas most of his life, and his life is fascinating, we'll get to it in a minute. But you can see that when you look at a person throughout life, you can see how that person changed over time. So that's something that for me is always very intriguing. So here are some of the major points of his kind of his life. So we're dealing with a German Jew. By the way, if you just Google, if you Google him up, you probably will see reference to him as the last German Jewish philosophers. So that's how people relate to him. Kind of, he is at the end of a generation of Jewish philosophers. He survived the Holocaust, but it's a generation that really is not basically, I would say, died out. So he died in 203. A few other people like Hannah Arendt, Hans Jonas, they died earlier. But you really need to think about how German Jewish thought came to an end with this person. And what does that mean? So he went to, when I said that he was an assimilated Jew, you can see that he studied in gymnasium. A lot of German Jews studied in the gymnasium. That was part of being an educated Jew. So what does that mean? That means that you're going to be exposed to humanistic thinking, to philosophical thinking, to the culture of Europe that starts with ancient Greece. That's what you study in the gymnasium. So he's very well educated, and that was the case also of other German Jews. So it's really important to know that German Jews took the culture around them very seriously. But he decides also to study in a Jewish institution. So the Hochschule for Wissenschaft des Judentums in Berlin, that's a reform institution. So he's learning about Jewish knowledge, Jewish texts, Jewish way of thinking when he goes to this institution of higher Jewish learning. And one of his teachers there actually is Leo Strauss, and we're going to mention that later on. But basically, this is a person who was very integrated in German Jewish life and in German life. In Kristallnacht, however, and I'm not totally clear why he was arrested among other people too, but what exactly led the Gestapo to him and why he's arrested, why he was interned in Sachsenhausen for several months, managed to get out of it, but it probably something to do with his family, I would imagine. But I need to look more why. But clearly, this is a person who is not going to end up in a concentration camp, but he was for a while interned and saw the Holocaust kind of as it begins, as it evolves. Now he manages to get out of Germany, manages to, again, how that was possible, because somebody helped him to get to Scotland, somebody facilitated that transition. And from Scotland, he's going to come to Canada after he's a refugee. We're dealing here with a refugee who he's going to start anew. And that's really amazing how already in Scotland, he goes back, he resumes his philosophical studies. And then in Canada, he's going to go to University of Toronto and get his PhD. Again, he really needs to start life all over again. But obviously, for a person like that, he has to think through what the Holocaust meant, because he himself, he didn't go to Auschwitz, he didn't survive Auschwitz, but he survived this horrendous experience. And then in Toronto, in Canada, he manages to be a reform rabbi. So it's very important that he acts as a rabbi. He's a rabbinic figure and a philosophical figure. And I think I have just example of two of his books here with me. I brought them with me. One book is a typical book written by a rabbi. That's What is Judaism? That's the title of the book. Another book is to mend the world. To mend the world is a slogan that every Jew knows today. That's the meaning of the phrase tikkun olam. Everybody's familiar, but actually that's a very philosophical book. Most people are not going to be able to go through this book and really make sense of, because there's a lot of discussion of Hegel, for example, a lot of discussion of Rosenzweig. So he's philosophically trained and rabbinically trained. And then at some point, after he develops his post-Holocaust thought, post-Holocaust theology, he comes to the conclusion that he cannot stay in exile, namely in the diaspora. He needs to settle in Jerusalem. He settles in Jerusalem in 1983, didn't really get as much attention and accolade that one would have expected in Israel. He did not get that. He had some close disciples, and it's the disciples, Raphael Jaspe is one, in Israel, Michael Morgan here in the United States. It's the disciples who really make his case. But it was very interesting why Israeli. If I ask Israeli people, Israeli friends of mine, if they heard about him, I don't think they did. So he's an interesting figure, but I would say we cannot think about the Holocaust without his name. So this is a list of the books I put kind of in order, just to give you a sense of how much the Holocaust is part of what he's about. He starts with philosophy. He writes first about, in the 60s, is mostly a philosophical text. More and more, he's going to move into thinking about theology, and especially post-Holocaust theology. And basically, he's helping Jews to be Jewish. I really believe that, for example, the popularity of the concept of tikkun olam, every Jew is engaged in tikkun olam, right? Well, he's probably one reason why that phrase became so central to American Jewish identity. So just tell you, I only have two books here, and then the rest of them are books about him, which I'll show you in a minute. But here are some of the books that he published. So if you look at the list that I just gave you, it's almost like he came out with a book every 2 years. So he's a very prolific person. It's unusual, I would say. And this is not even everything that he has written. Now, who is this audience? To whom does he write? I would say he writes for Jewish scholars. Definitely, he's writing for rabbis. He's, I think, writing for philosophers, Jewish and Christians, people who are really trained. A lot of the books are actually very technical, I have to admit, especially this book, To Mend the World. And Christians are also very interested in him. In the whole conversation about what does it mean to be Jewish after Auschwitz, he was at the center of the conversation. So, and he's talking to a lot of non-Jews at the time. Those who are historians of Jewish philosophy or historians of European philosophers, they are also very interested in him. And I would say the general educated public, whether Jewish or non-Jewish, could be interested in him. But in truth, not everything that he writes is easy. On the other hand, sometimes he had such beautiful statements that really get to the heart of the matter. He because he was a rabbi and a pulpit rabbi, he really knew kind of how to make a turn of phrase. So keep in mind how to make sense of him by thinking about the audience. Now, I'm going to give you two people who really devote a lot of their life, especially this person, Michael Morgan. He was my colleague in Indiana University. He devoted his entire life to thinking about, basically to publicizing, to analyze, to popularize, to make sense of Fackenheim's work. Now, he didn't only write about Fackenheim. Michael Morgan is a major philosopher and historian of Jewish philosophy. He has written a lot of Levinas. I think that his works on Levinas are probably the best. If you want to understand Immanuel Levinas, another very important philosopher, Morgan's work is terrific. But this is just to give you in a sense that a philosopher needs a disciple to make the case. And I actually think that it's most of that sentence which I just said is true about men. It's not really the case with women. Women, even though when you have female philosophers, they don't get the kind of discipleship, the kind of kind of relationship with a younger person who will really devote his life to explicate what they said. There's only one case I can think about, and it's in Israel. Actually, a person that I know quite well, Tamar Ross, she has one student, Onit Irshai, who actually can see herself as a disciple, but it's a very unique situation to men. So this is one example. That's another example. Kenneth Hart Green, both of Michael Morgan and Ken Green were students of Fackenheim. And the two books on the left are books about Fackenheim philosophy. The three books on the right are about another German Jewish philosopher who was a teacher of Fackenheim, and that's Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss could have been a focus of our series. Maybe I will teach about him in another setting, but just to show you how both of these people, both from University of Toronto, are interested in their teacher and making sense of their teacher. Okay, so all that is by situating Fackenheim. Now, let's get into ideas. Are you ready to do a little bit more theoretical stuff? Here we go. So, where do we start? He was a student in basically the Reform Seminary for Rabbis. So in that setting, he is exposed to the way Reform thinkers, Reform theologians, Reform philosophers from the 19th century, how they thought about Judaism. And the way they thought about Judaism is highly philosophical. And who is the philosopher who really shaped what Reform Judaism was all about? The answer is Immanuel Kant. There's no way to think about Judaism as understood in Germany in the 19th century without reference to Immanuel Kant. So the focus of Reform Judaism on ethical monotheism, that's coming out of a Jewish Kantian tradition. How Jews took the ideas of Kant and really adapted them to say, you know what? Judaism is already Kantianism, or most of the insights of Kantianism can be found in Judaism. And the issue that I would like to bring to your attention is that Fackenheim is going to be critical of it. Even though he grew out of that, he came out of that way of thinking about being Jewish as a highly theoretical, highly philosophical. The focus is on the God idea, the God idea. So, and the God idea is the content of the God idea is justice. It's about the moral will. So for Reform theologians in the 19th century, to be Jewish is to be kind of committed to the notion of justice, to the notion of a God who is one and God who is just. And that's, in a sense, the essence of it. Now, it's more complicated. Obviously, philosophers write a lot more than that, but they really think in terms of the Kantian model. So it's rational, it's theoretical, it focuses on the ethical. And what's missing there is the real personhood of God, if you wish, the personal dimension. And that's where Fackenheim is going to kind of latch on. Basically, he's going to say, look at the second line. It's a beautiful line where he says, if Adonai has ever been a God hypothesis, there would be no Jews. What does that mean? That means that if you think about God only intellectually as an idea, as the ideal justice, you're not going to be able to commit yourself to it. It's too theoretical. It's too abstract. It's too unemotional. So Fackenheim, in a sense, is talking to Jews and trying to find a different way of thinking about God. And it's not going to be the theoretical, cerebral, rational way. Are you with me? You see, I don't know where you are in terms of your religious commitments, but obviously, in the 19th century, Reform Jews, Reform thinkers, Reform theologians thought this is the highest way of thinking about God. This is the best way of thinking about God. And in a sense, what Fackenheim is going to say, no, what we need to do is to think not in the God as a thought, or as he calls it, a necessary thought, but rather God of action. You have to think in terms of action. You need to think also about how you relate to God. So relationship, relationality is what it's about. It's not so much the God idea.
Saying, in his opinion, can be Judaism without faith?
So the word faith, that's a very good question. The word faith is very complicated because, yes. Okay, so the question here is Fackenheim saying that you cannot be Jewish without faith? And I'm saying that the word faith is the difficult word here. I would say in some ways the answer is yes to the way you pose it. You need more than just what you believe. It's not just about belief. Now remember that for the Kantian thinking, it's not so much about belief, it's about knowledge. It's about philosophy. And he's saying if you're just thinking philosophically, then something is missing. It's not enough. It's not the full story. Now, who influenced him? I'll skip one and I'll go to this one. The person who influenced the way Fackenheim answered the question that you raised is Buber. And that's the guy that we talked about last year. Okay, so Martin Buber died 1965. Martin Buber, another European Jew, was born in Vienna, but most of his career was in Germany. He, in a sense, taught Jews to think differently about God and what it means to believe in God. So faith is too, I'll be facetious and say that faith is almost like too Christian a term in this case. What you have to think is more in terms of a relationship, because God is not an it. God is not a thing. God is not an object. Most of us think about God as an object, right? And in a sense, what Buber taught us to think about God, and also to feel, not just to think of God as a person, as a subject, as something that you have a relation, or not something, but someone with whom you have a relationship with. In a sense, that's what Fackenheim's position will be. And Fackenheim will tell you that the relationship with God existed even in Auschwitz. So even in Auschwitz, in the worst of the worst, and you'll see how he's going to talk about Auschwitz, even then God was present. And God was present as a commanding voice. You can hear what God wants you to do and to make sense of, even in Auschwitz. That basically will be the message of Fackenheim and why he's so central to our way of thinking about the Holocaust. But it's from Buber that Fackenheim developed his understanding of the relationality of the concept. It's not a concept of, it's not cerebral, it's much more affective, much more what you feel and how you relate. Okay, now another person who taught or influenced Fackenheim would be another philosopher. You'll see him later. That's a person who worked closely with Buber, and that's Rosenzweig, Franz Rosenzweig. But basically, the question that Fackenheim had to deal with is, how is it possible in the modern world to listen to God, to hear what God is saying, to even be in the presence of God? So that's the concept of revelation. So he is a philosopher, and he knows that many modern Jews no longer take the concept that God can reveal his will in the form of Torah. Most Jews in the 19th century, if they were educated and university products, probably didn't believe in that. Rosenzweig, who comes out also of this assimilated Jewish background, makes a turn. He was close to conversion, actually, but makes a turn and basically becomes a person that if we were alive today, he would have been a modern Orthodox or even perhaps even ultra Orthodox. But that's another story. But basically, from the issue that concerns Fackenheim is, how can I think about revelation? How can I define what revelation is or explain what revelation is in a way that is philosophically respectable. So that's his challenge. How can I think about it in a way that makes sense? And the term that he comes up with is the concept of root experience. Root experience is what revelation is. Some experiences are so transformative, so formative, so meaningful. And those experiences tell us what God wants us to do or to be, or what life is all about. So Revelation, he's going to argue all his books, and they're difficult, some of them. All his books is how Revelation is not nonsense, how Revelation is philosophically respectable idea. He has to defend that, because otherwise he's not a philosopher, and that's what he does. So here's some discussion of root experiences. Root experience is an experience like Sinai, is an experience that shapes everything else. Can there be a Jew without reference to revelation in Sinai? Fackenheim would say, not really. You cannot really be Jewish and be oblivious to the concept of Sinai, to the experience of Sinai, to thinking about Sinai, what does it mean to me, and so forth. So he gives you, I give you at bottom, like the Exodus from Egypt, parting of the Red Sea, Sinaitic revelation. Those are what he would call root experiences. So they are kind of formative experience or experiences in which you encounter. So the word encounter is very important in Fackenheim's way of thinking. You encounter God, and you can encounter God in all sorts of other ways, but for the group, those are the experiences that shape who you are. So look at the middle of the slide. The idea here is that the past is going to really shape those experiences of the past. It's going to shape who we are in the present. And these are public events. These are not just subjective things. So there's no mysticism here. For him, Judaism is not about what a particular thinker felt in a particular moment. No, he's going to talk about root experiences of the entire group, the entire collective, the entire people. So root experiences is where, in a sense, kind of where religion all comes from. And there are a few of those root experiences. So now the question is, what do I do with those root experiences? The interesting thing in Judaism is that the root experience is reenacted. If you think what happens on Shabbat, when you say the Kiddush, in the Kiddush, we basically think about two things, right? What do we think about in the Kiddush? Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, and the creation of the world. So those are examples of how everything the Jews do on Shabbat, on the various festivals, whether it's Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, you take an experience and you reenact it in ritual. So the ritual enables Jews to be Jewish. Does that make sense? Yes? So here, the point is in the experience, look at the last kind of rubric at the bottom on the right. You basically experience a divine presence. That's the idea. On Shabbat, the idea is, or the experience is, if it's a good experience, is that you feel something is different, that God is present in your home, in the way you eat, in the way you interact with other members of your community and your family and so forth. But for him, all of those experiences are always historical. So it's not just in the head. It's something that happens in public, something that is shared by a whole group of people. Now, what happened when you have experiences that go against the root experience? And that's basically an epoch-making event. What happened when you have a Holocaust that goes against what you thought you expect from God? God doesn't behave, or you don't experience God in Auschwitz in the way that you expected to experience God. That's really his problem. Kind of, how do I make sense? Or take another event, October 7th. A lot of people in Israel feel that October 7th was as traumatic as the Holocaust, and there's a debate in Israel whether this is appropriate or inappropriate. But the point is that you can have a situation in which something that you expected to happen didn't happen. There's a tension or some kind of a conflict, and you have to make sense of this. So there are those epoch-making events that force you to rethink everything, and that's what he's asking us to do. He's asking us to think through, like 1967, Six-Day War was an epoch-making event. We cannot really understand what's going on in Israel right now without some discussion of 1967. So I won't get into it, but this would be an example of an epoch-making event. So if you look at the middle line, when he says, on Sinai we received the Torah, and in Lublin, the ghetto of Lublin, we gave it back. So something happens in an epoch-making event that really kind of gets things out of joint, really gets things kind of into a conflict. So given this kind of an approach, what do we learn so far about Fackenheim? So far, what we see that he thinks about Judaism in religious terms. But the problem today, in the 20th century and the 21st century, for sure, most Jews are not religious. Most Jews are secular. So how, I'm just posing it as a question for you to think about, how do you expect secular Jews to relate to what he's saying? So that's a big question in a sense. What he's saying to all Jews need to know their sources. They need to know Torah, they need to know the interpretive tradition, they need to know Jewish history. They really need to be immersed. So he's speaking like a rabbi. They need to be immersed, and they need to be thinking. And they need to think even about painful things. And when he started talking about the Holocaust, it wasn't common. It wasn't like everybody was talking about the Holocaust in the early 70s. No, it wasn't. And he kind of forced people to say, think about it. It's difficult. It's not pleasant. Look at it and come to terms with it. That's what he's asking us to do as a Holocaust thinker. So here's a kind of a summary of some of his if you want how to make sense of it so far. This is it, but I would like to get into the heart of the matter quickly, into his post-Holocaust. So first of all, let's keep in mind that he's not the only one who is a post-Holocaust thinker. I could have talked about these guys. You see him in the left on the bottom, but the one at the top left, that's Eliezer Berkovitz, an Orthodox Jew who has written in the 60s about faith after Auschwitz. The one next to him is Arthur Cohen, very interesting character, kind of a thinker, as a student of Mordechai Kaplan, continues in that direction, but really raising question, what does it mean to be Jewish after the Holocaust? Or Richard Rubinstein. Richard Rubinstein was a Reform rabbi and became the death of God theology type person in the 60s. So after Auschwitz is a book that he wrote in 1967. So in the 60s, people just begin to write about the Holocaust in America. Then you have Fackenheim, you know him, and the person next to Fackenheim is Greenberg, Irving Greenberg, who is a modern Orthodox person who has written extensively on the Holocaust. We can do a course or a series just on these characters, just on these thinkers. So here's just an example of this enormous amount of literature on Holocaust theology and on the meaning of the Holocaust. It's the topic that people write more. There are more books about the Holocaust, somebody told me a long time ago, than about the Bible. Can you imagine? It was really a surprise to me. I did not know that. But maybe that's correct. Then the question is, let's take a minute to think, what does it mean to think about the Holocaust as a philosophical problem? The Holocaust is a rupture. That's Fackenheim's main point. The Holocaust messes up philosophy. You cannot be a philosopher, in a sense, what he's saying. You cannot be a philosopher, do business as usual if the Holocaust happened. But then he's saying, don't look away. Don't say, oh, well, this is too difficult or too other. That's the expression at the top line. It's another planet. That comes from Elie Wiesel. The Holocaust is so other, so different reality, different world. It's beyond our ability to make sense of it. which is what you see at the last line. So it's incomprehensible. It's kind of shattering everything we think about. In a sense, Fackenheim said, it's true that it's very other, that it's very different, that there's very rupture, but we need to understand the rupture. And then we need to overcome the rupture. We need to figure out how we're going to stay Jewish after Auschwitz. A lot of Jews didn't stay Jewish after Auschwitz. And they said, no, we can't believe in a God that allowed this to happen. We cannot worship God after Auschwitz. That also is a possibility. What he's saying is, yes, Holocaust was horrible, Auschwitz was horrible, it is a radical evil, but the Holocaust has a religious meaning. And how to confront to confront Holocaust is not just a philosophical challenge, it's a theological challenge. What kind of a God allowed this to happen? Where was God in the Holocaust? Buber is going to talk about the eclipse of God. A lot of people don't like that expression because they think it's too wishy-washy, it's too thin. What is the eclipse of God? You have when you need God as a friend, God is not there. What kind of God is this, right? So that's a real problem. And there's also a question of where's hope after the Holocaust? In a sense, those are the questions that Fackenheim will try to make sense of. So did I skip one? No. Yeah. So confronting. Yeah. Here we are. So we have a problem of how to make. This is Auschwitz. Everybody's familiar with this picture. In a sense, what he's saying is, first of all, I have to be a witness. He wasn't in Auschwitz, but he saw the Holocaust in the early years, and I have to stand up to it. I have to talk about it. I'm not going to ignore it. I'm going to force Jews, in a sense, not force in a violent way, but I'm going to compel Jews or convince Jews that they really have to make sense of it. And the bottom line is, look at the last line, which we will say more about it. Jews are forbidden to grant posthumous victory to Hitler. The meaning of the Holocaust, that's what Fackenheim defined as the 614th commandment. Do not give Hitler posthumous victory. We'll say about in a minute more about that, but there's a big problem for him as a thinker and that was a huge issue in the 70s and 80s and 90s, how to think about the Holocaust, philosophically or theologically. I use the word singularity, but usually the debate was on the word uniqueness. Is the Holocaust unique? And what is the uniqueness of the Holocaust? But clearly for him, the Holocaust is unique in a particular way, but it doesn't mean that I cannot talk about it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have a religious meaning. I can verbalize, I can think it through, I can really try to find meaning in it. I think that's why, in a sense, silence is not enough for Fackenheim. You cannot be silent. You have to go on and think it through. So this is a very famous picture. All of you here probably are familiar with that picture. But when he talks about the radical evil of the Holocaust, he speaks a lot about the Muslim figure. The figure, what the Nazis tried to do is to really suck out life from the individuals that were enslaved in the concentration camps. And there, the goal is the only response, in a sense, is to be committed to life. So in the midst of this horror, in the midst of this dehumanization, in the midst of this trauma, your life, survival is itself the response to what's going on here. So in the next slide, you see it here, and hopefully I can get to it a little bit better. The evil of the Holocaust world, which is radical and far removed from banality. Here he's arguing against Hannah Arendt, who's saying that the Holocaust is about banal evil, banality of evil. And he said, no, this is not about banality of evil. This is philosophically intelligible after Auschwitz, only in the exact sense in which it was already understood in Auschwitz. In other words, the people in Auschwitz taught us how to think about Auschwitz. They went through the horror, and in their commitment to survive, to live despite of it, that's the meaning, in a sense, that's the meaning of the Holocaust. So, as he said in the other line, Jews are commanded to survive as Jews. So, survival itself is the response. Life itself is the response. You cannot give Hitler a posthumous victory. And that's the famous definition of the 614th commandment. Jews are commanded to survive as Jews, lest the Jewish people perish. So after the Holocaust, there's one new commandment: be Jewish. And you cannot think about this institution where we are talking, right, the Jewish Community Center of the Valley of the Sun, without the notion of Jewish survival. Because the organized Jewish community really rallied around this concept that survival is what it's about. And the 614th commandment is telling you that even in Auschwitz, God existed as a commanding voice. Be Jewish. I summarized the three elements of the 614th on this slide. Do not give Hitler a posthumous victory. Survive as Jews. Remember the victims of Auschwitz. Do not despair. So you cannot despair. You cannot give up on being Jewish. That's the message that he's giving us. Now, what are the implications of it? The Holocaust was an epoch-making event. After the Holocaust, we cannot do business as usual. But we, who are all survivors in a sense, it doesn't matter even if you were not there, or even if you don't have families, members who perished in Auschwitz. In a sense, we're all survivors. We have to really think through what it all means because it happened. So the Holocaust frames the meaning of Jewish existence forever. That's the point, forever. Now, that is going to be difficult because if you're going to say that everything revolves around the Holocaust or the meaning of the Holocaust, then you have to ask, well, what happened to other dimensions of Jewish life if the Holocaust becomes so central? Do you see the problem? And that's especially true in education. If we focus Jewish education only on the Holocaust, as Fackenheim wanted us to do, what happens to other dimensions of the Jewish experience? And as a teacher, I'm sure Professor Miriam also as a teacher, we have to think about it. How central do we want to make it? So, authentic Jewish life after the Holocaust is all related to this obligation. We have an obligation to be Jewish, remain Jewish, not to forget about being Jewish, and not to despair. Always find in the Jewish activity, Jewish life, the meaning of our life, and that's the source of hope, or recover hope. So when it comes to, and I realize I am aware of the time, we only have 15 minutes left, but if you, we can stop here and take questions if you want, or I have one more section which is about his sense of history, so I'll go through this rather quickly. But I do want you to think in terms of what's problematic about Fackenheim. The fact that he says things and they're very powerful and very meaningful doesn't mean that there are no problems in what he's saying, but especially from Jewish historical perspective, and I'm an historian, the question is what happens when the Holocaust takes such center stage in terms of the Jewish experience. So that's why, and we don't, here, I will give that up, but maybe a little bit too philosophical, but basically the last part of this lecture is about the importance of history and why for Jews, you cannot just be or operate on the level of philosophy. We are historical. We are embodied people. We live in time and space, and you have to think historically. And that's, in a sense, what he's doing as a student of Hegel. He was a student of Hegel, spent a lot of time writing about Hegel, explicating Hegel, and finding what's problematic about Hegel and how Hegel is really a deeply Christian thinker and what's problematic about it from a Jewish perspective. What Fackenheim did is to give us a focus. This is a small book, lovely book. If you want to read maybe one thing by Fackenheim, that's a good thing to read. So God is present in history. That's the message. It's not in philosophy so much, it's in the past. And the past requires you always to interpret. It's every story makes sense only because it goes through your message of interpretation. So what is interpretation? That's what you hear in the synagogue. That's what you hear in many Jewish books that are written by scholars, Judaic scholars. But basically, Judaism and history are intertwined. You can't think Jewishly without history, and you can't think historically without the role of Judaism in shaping the historical experience. But the past is always with us. That's the point. You cannot just ignore it. It's always shaping who you are. So the rest, I will skip some of it, some of those senses, some of those slides. But Fackenheim really thought through how the meaning of the meaning of being Jewish after the Holocaust can be positive, not just negative, but it can be a source of hope because it enables you to be Jewish in a new way. And this is the reference to a book that I mentioned before. A lot of people engage in Judaism today and say, what we do is tikkun olam, repair of the world. We are making the world a better place. That feminists are saying that, environmentalists are saying that, a lot of people are saying it. And it all comes from him in a sense. He articulated, not it's all, but he was very important in making this concept so central to modern Jews. So with this, I'll skip those things. You can read it alone. But basically, I'm giving you an example of how this person, who was philosophically trained and who was rabbinically trained as well, how he puts together a very thoughtful, deep, demanding, intellectually demanding way for all of us to think about the Holocaust. So let's stop here in terms of possible discussion, and you tell me whether Fackenheim is worth knowing. So questions and questions. Have you ever heard about the 614th commandment? No? Isn't you say yes, other people say no. How is it possible? You see, in the 70s, everybody talked about that. So that's kind of the interesting thing, how philosophers, how shall I put it without getting too depressed about it, but philosophers are easily forgotten, right? This guy was such a big name early on, and all the people we're going to talk about. And very quickly, people forget about it. So my commitment in doing this series last year and this year is bring the philosophers back to the center of the conversation. So any other question? You see, so if we look here at the discussion on that I shared with you, tell me, what do you find interesting or compelling, or would you like to read more about Fackenheim, for example?
Can I ask also, if you have a question in the room, to please use the mic so that people on Zoom can also hear you.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll bring it around to you.
The Zoom. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So the mic for a mic.
Thank you. One question I have, that we've reached basically a transition from Holocaust survivors to going beyond people, and it becomes, does the Holocaust now become more abstract? And how is that impacting in terms of the religious as well as other responses to it, when there's less of a personal connection, but for it, and less of a visceral?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question and very problematic situation. Holocaust survivors are dying off, have been dying off for quite a while. And eventually, in 10, 20 years, there will be no person who actually survived this horror. And you're right that it's reasonable to expect that it will become more theoretical, shall we say, or more abstract. Well, one way of overcoming the problem is actually something that happened here last week. When you have writers, like the woman who spoke, what's her name? Lois, I forgot her last name. She was here. She's a writer who writes for young adults. So writing literature would be one way of dealing with the problem. So it's not the same as dealing with the person who actually survived it. But I think the literary dimension enables you to preserve the emotional, the almost visceral experience. It's less cerebral. But it is a problem. And let me tell you, well, I won't make it more complicated than it is, but you're right. Yeah, how are we going to teach about the Holocaust 20 years from now? Big question. Yes, go ahead.
Auschwitz is still there. People visit it, and you can't possibly be there without an emotional experience.
That's very true.
That- that-
Auschwitz is still there, the buildings, but it is all, I would say, mediated experience, right? It's not. It's kind. Yeah, you should. I'll give you a problem. Let's say in Israel. In Israel, people in high school. So there's a big operation that takes students in high school to Auschwitz. Is it a good experience for those people? Is it a positive, not positive, but is it a transformative or deep experience? Kind of yes and no. There's a lot of debate what's going on with those high school trips, and maybe they should be framed differently. People need to learn differently before they go to experience Auschwitz. So what happens in Auschwitz? How to experience? These are all difficult questions. But you're right, we still have the physical remains of that place. But it's going to be difficult in the next 20 years, 30 years. And the reason I stopped earlier is to say that there's a tension right now going on between Holocaust studies and how we study the Holocaust and genocide studies. How do we study other genocides and how to, find the proper medium between those two fields is a challenge. But the bottom line is it's difficult. As much as it's going to be very difficult to speak about October 7th. How are we going to, for example, right now in Israel, there's a big debate. Are we going to renovate all the buildings, let's say in Be'eri, Kibbutz Be'eri, or Kibbutz Nir Oz, or Kisufim? Are we going to renovate those buildings or leave some of those buildings unrenovated so that people can come back to Be'eri and see what happened in October 7th and really experience the horror? So that's exactly how do we preserve the horrific past? In a sense, that's the problem. Yes, you wanted to raise a question. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of a personal story. So I'm from Calgary. So we have a program. It's called March of the Living, and I've taken students, grade 12, 11, 12 students, to Poland and then to Israel. And also we do a program for younger students, both Jewish and non-Jewish, where we take them to Washington, D.C. I've also interviewed for the Shoah Foundation for Steven Spielberg's survivors. So pretty well all the Holocaust survivors in Calgary, we've interviewed them for the program. And this has been one of the major questions. Do you still believe in God after the Holocaust? And they're all survivors of different camps or ghettos or hiding different. And it's mixed. Some said yes, and some said, no, I can't believe in God. However, and this is a little bit of a challenge to this philosophy, is that can you still be Jewish and participate in Jewish life without believing God, but believe in the transformation of the stories in our peoplehood, in our shared history? So a little bit of a challenge of that.
Yes, it's a theological question. I cannot answer. Each person needs to answer it for himself or herself, obviously.
That's what the questions.
Yeah, so can there be my answer would be like this. Can there be Jewish existence without some discussion of the belief in God? No. But what does that discussion mean? That's what it all depends if you take secularism seriously. And I do
Out of knowledge.
Yeah, so that's right. So the more you know about the canon of Jewish writings, the more you know the text, the interpretive tradition. It's all about an invitation to study and to get deeper into the text. You're not going to find simple answers. There are no simple answers. It cannot be. But there is an invitation to study. And in a sense, that's what Fackenheim is saying. When he focuses on the interpretive tradition, said, go and study. It's all there for you. But, he demanded people confront it, or the word encounter that he loved. You have to encounter the text. Our problem today is most people don't care about the text. They don't want to encounter the text. That's the challenge. How do we bring that desire to encounter the text And that's in a sense what we're doing here. I'm saying there's so much wonderful Jewish philosophical thought, terrific wisdom, and we are not encountering it. And we are paying for it. It's that we are kind of we are failing ourselves by not accessing these books that were written and that people used to read, but they don't read anymore. And I'm saying, let's go back and read it because there's so much.
TikTok is faster.
That's right. Today we have TikToks, we have Instagram, we have Facebook, God knows what. I'm not on any of those social programs, but I fully agree with you. Social media makes dealing with these kind of books. This is why I schlepp those books, even though they're heavy. But I really want people to go back to the books. But now it's all online. If it's not online, it doesn't exist. So who wants to read? That's the challenge. Do we have questions from the
Yeah,
online?
there was one online question that was about as memory of events fade, how do root moments retain their power?
Yeah, that's a very good question. For Fackenheim, the answer would be only through ritual. But you can say, what about Jews who don't do anything Jewish? So there's no Passover, there's no Hanukkah, there's no Purim, there's no nothing. So how do they retain a root experience? The answer is they're not going to retain. It's just that it's going to dissipate. It's going to disappear. So that's the challenge. So when we speak about Jewish survival, what does that mean? What kind of survival do we imagine? What do we need to do for survival? And as an educator, you are an educator. As educators, we say education is the only way towards survival. But it's hard, and it's not fashionable, and it's not easy. Okay. So that's kind of and we have some students in the audience, right? So guys, are you in high school? In college? And what's your take? How do you relate to this material?
I find it interesting, I guess, the idea of whether or not faith is an important part of it, because I have a lot of friends. I'm not Jewish myself, but I have a lot of friends. Oh, sorry. I'm not Jewish myself, but I have a lot of friends who are, and some of them are practicing and some of them are not practicing. So I think that connection between whether or not being practicing is the crucial part of Judaism, or whether it's the shared history is interesting.
Yeah, and does it have to be either or? No, it doesn't. You need both. You need the history, you need the knowledge, you need the practice, you need the emotional sense, you need the pride, you need the belonging. It's all together. It's all part of being Jewish. And the question for all of us is, how do we create those settings or those idioms that young people of all ages can feel that it's meaningful to them? But for most people, the Jewish way of life or the Jewish concerns, it's not that meaningful. So how do we make it meaningful? That's the challenge. Right? I don't have an answer. I can only say, as an educator, I want to make it accessible. That's what I do as a teacher. My job is to make sense of it. So any other contact, a question from, Stephanie has a question. Okay.
Here you go. Thank you.
I don't really have a question, but I have a comment. And we've been talking about the after effects of the Holocaust. I think you all know that we are building a Holocaust education center in town. And thinking about what this is going to represent, one of the things that they learned, the designers, was that particularly non-Jewish people had no idea about that there were Jews in Europe before the Holocaust, where they came from, whatever. Mm-hmm. So part of the design of this new Holocaust Education Center will be to have an entry section that is about Jewish life before the Holocaust, because people, and high school students, I took high school students down when they did Holocaust by Bullets from Central High School. They'd never heard of the Holocaust. I was really, and they were very moved. The other part of it is, what do you do with the Holocaust after it? We know it was horrible. So the other focus of it at the end of this experience is there will be reference to other genocides, and the focus is going to be about helping students, and it's primarily for high school students. How did you become an upstander instead of a bystander. And so trying to change the narrative about what that whole discussion is, it's an ambitious, but it's going to be a beautiful, and I just couldn't let my husband's very involved in this, and he would not forgive me if I hadn't at least mentioned that. But it gives thought to some of the things that you were talking about today.
Yes, no, it's a major educational undertaking, and some of my colleagues, you know them, my colleagues at ASU are very involved in making kind of doing the scholarly work, the infrastructure to provide the infrastructure for this educational work. So yeah, we that's what we need to do, education. But we don't know how it's gonna go. Let me just suggest on next time, that's our guy next time, right? On the 26th. So I invite everybody here and online to join us. He was a Holocaust survivor too. He managed to get out of Europe from Belgium. He wasn't from Belgium. He was from Vienna originally, but Vienna, Belgium, North Africa, West Indies, and finally ended up in the United States. So very interesting character, but in a sense, he's continuing the challenge. How can we be Jewish in a new way, renewed way? And what do we need to do to think differently about Judaism? And he's going to come up with basically a new age Judaism, new age type Judaism. So we'll talk about that.
Thank you very much, Hava.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. And we'll see you all on the 26th.